So recently I came out with the easiest build to play in Guild Wars 2, and it was just a simple core guardian which required you not to use many of your virtues, not to use many of your utilities, or they didn't have many animations to them, and just spamming symbols. Now I've created a build that is almost as easy as that for the Scrapper and basically the Engineer class. So the idea of the build is you're using Flamethrower, and the auto attack on Flamethrower is very usable. And what I mean by usable is, it just cleaves everything in front of you. There's really no aim necessary, and there's really no skill or timing necessary because it's just a pure stream of damage. So yeah, that's pretty much all you do on this build is just Flamethrower 1. But there's a lot of theory craft that goes into the build to allow you to do that, right? Because if you have to cast other skills, let me show you how Flamethrower works. So Flamethrower is just like this, and then you can just keep pressing the auto attack, and yeah, you just constantly do damage. But the thing is, you can constantly get value off that damage, but if you have to stop doing that, then you stop getting that damage output, and the build effectively loses a lot of its value because you're now doing something else. So I tried to create a build that has as few animations as possible, and therefore you can use those skills while spamming the Flamethrower auto attack and get as much value out of the Flamethrower auto attack as you can. And yeah, basically it's just really easy to play because of that. But there's a little bit of complexity behind it other than just, Flamethrower autoing, even though that's kind of like the joke. So I take Demolisher Amulet, and the reason for that is because you want toughness as a Scrapper, because you get a lot of sustain from Barrier. It's very valuable to you. You don't want to go Menders because you don't get the crit damage, and you do want to be doing a lot of damage with the Flamethrower because there's a lot of modifiers to allow you to do damage. So you'd either go Marauders or Demolishers, but yeah, you probably want Demolishers because you're going to get a decent amount of health from Rune of Divinity, and that kind of makes up for you losing 180 vitality just from being a Scrapper. But you do gain back the ability to gain Barrier whenever you deal damage, so you gain a lot of sustain. You just have to worry about not instantly dying, and then you can kind of secure your sustain. So yeah, Divinity is just really nice for the maximum health and the extra stats. And I take Courage and Purging, so you don't really want to be swapping weapons that much. So oftentimes Purging is better than Cleansing because you'll proc it more often. And Courage is just because you want to be getting as much might as possible. You could take something else than Courage, but I just figure Courage is the best because it's something that you don't have to play around. It's just passive, and it allows you to just camp Flamethrower. So yeah. So let's talk about the traits. Firearms is necessary for this build because of the Juggernaut trait. So while you are in the Flamethrower kit, you gain stability every 3 seconds and might. So, and then might has increased duration, right? So it's a little bit more, but it's mainly the stability that you really want because while you're in Flamethrower, right, you've got basically a perma 1 stack of stab every 3 seconds. So if people are CCing you more than once every 3 seconds, then maybe you'll get CC'd. But otherwise, it shrugs off a lot of CCs that just randomly come at you, and it makes you able to just play the game. It's kind of fun, right? To be CC'd and not be able to play the game is not fun. So having perma 1 stack of stab is kind of fun because you have control of your character all the time, almost. Obviously you can get corrupted and stuff like that, or have a lot of people focus you with a lot of CCs. But yeah, for the most part, yeah, Juggernaut is a really strong trait, and that's kind of the whole idea of Flamethrower, right? So crits have a chance to cause bleeding, 33% chance. So we're going to have crit chance from Demolisher Amulet, 56%. We're also going to have a little bit of fury uptime, maybe like 50%, depending on how close we are to the enemies. So we can get a lot of ferocity as well when we have fury, which is nice because we want a lot of modifiers to increase our passive, one spam. And then because you have fury, right, you'll get like, sometimes you'll have 76% crit chance. And whenever you crit, right, you have a chance to bleed, and bleeding gives you might. So you're gaining might on just passively through your, being in the flamethrower, just hitting people with Sigil of Courage, and then 33% of the time when you crit, you'll also gain might because you'll bleed 33% of the time when you crit. And then you also have a increased chance to crit bleeding foes. So if you're hitting people a lot and bleeding them a lot, then you've got more chance to bleed them because you've got even more crit chance. So you'd have like 86% chance to crit. And yeah, it's just really good because you want to be doing damage. And then bleeding has a longer duration, but you're not really doing much bleed duration anyways. But it's not useless. Then in alchemy, this is kind of necessary too. You have a bunch of like passive traits. So I don't take protection injection because you get more sustain from health insurance, and you have a bunch of like passive elixirs here, which they're kind of long cooldown. This elixir is actually pretty good because it gives you fury on a 30-second cooldown when you're below 75% HP. So that's pretty good too because it, in conjunction with no scope, you have a decent amount of fury uptime. You don't really get it from much else. And you got a little bit of other boons here like might, retail, and swiftness. Those are always good. Backpack regenerator is really good too because you're going to be in the flamethrower kit the whole time, so you can just pass this off as a 120 heal per second. You are going to leave the flamethrower kit sometimes to do like hammer skills, but what you'll do is you'll leave and then you'll cast the hammer skill, and then while that hammer skill is casting, you'll go right back into flamethrower. So like even though it seems like it's going to be a long time out of the hammer or out of the flamethrower set, you actually can be in it while casting other skills. It's just like you have to like do it while in the animation, and then your next animation can be the flamethrower. So I like that because it gives you sustain over time, and this is kind of like a sustain oriented build, just doing damage over time. You don't take Elixir E, even though that would save you in a lot of situations because it's just a really long cooldown, and I feel like this sustain is a little bit more reliable. And then you could take Comeback Cure for more sustain, but I think you're gonna get more from regen. Like this is like more for your allies, and then this is more for you, so it just depends. Because you do have Purge Gyro, which cleanses allies, so that could be really good. So next you have Compounding Chemicals. This gives you like 5% boon duration, and with Divinity Rune that adds up to like 10% boon duration, so that's kind of nice. So you have like an extra 20% might duration, and that's pretty good because you want to be getting lots of might. And whenever you give yourself a boon, you heal yourself for like 40. And yeah, you're giving yourself quite a lot of boons, right? Because you're proccing might every interval with all of these traits and stuff and sigils. So every time you proc that might one time, there's no ICD, right? So you gain 40 healing, so it adds up over time. And yeah, it just adds to the sustain of the build. And then we have Iron Blooded. So the reason why I don't take elixirs on this build, even though they give you might, and that's kind of like the idea of the build is to get might, is because elixirs have animations to them usually. So like, yeah, obviously Elixir U doesn't have an animation, but if I were to use like another elixir, it would have an animation. Elixir S, yeah, that's pretty good at preventing you from getting focused, but the tool belt skill that gives you stealth maybe isn't that useful. So it's kind of like not because like this is a team fighting build, right? You go into team fights and you kind of like ignore the CCs that are just flying around, and then you do massive damage, and you can support your allies with gyros. So like an elixir build might be more 1v1 oriented, but even then I don't really like it because there's cast times, and I can just take Iron Blooded, which is a passive, so I don't really need to go into like any animations to get value from this trait, whereas HGH I do, because it's just whenever I have boons on me, I gain, you know, damage reduction and Condi damage reduction. So it's just really good, and you're gonna be having at least 2 pretty much might and stability at all times, but you'll also get swiftness. I'll show that later, and then you have some other boons here like with fury and stuff like that. So yeah, you can get a decent amount of reduction from this trait. Next we have Scrapper. So Scrapper gives you function gyro, which is really insane in 3v3s, because having a stomp ability or a res ability is just always good to, you know, you don't want to lose a player because then you lose the game. Whereas in Conquest, losing a player just means you rotate out sometimes, right? So it's really important that you keep people alive in 3s, but it's also really good for winning fights in Conquest too. So function gyro is really nice because it can be used for like the support of your team, right? But it's a 25-second cooldown. So like if you think maybe your teammate's not going to die or you're rotating between nodes, what you can do is throw down your function gyro, right? And it reses people in that field, but it doesn't need to. It can just put down a lightning field, and then you can use Flamethrower too, so you don't even need to leave your Flamethrower, and that'll give you a blast finisher, right? Your Flamethrower 2 into a light field, or a lightning field, and that'll give you swiftness. But also, whenever you use a so leap finishers give you super speed, and blast finishers give you and your allies super speed. So you gain super speed and swiftness from blasting your function gyro, and you can also do that with the hammer 5 because that is also a lightning field, and your bulwark gyro. But generally you don't want to waste those 2 skills while rotating, and also like you want to be careful wasting function gyro. If you know, you're rotating into a node where your teammates need help, they might need to be res. So in that case, you could use super speed instead of swiftness. So you can use like regenerating mist and then your hammer 3, and that'll give you super speed, and then you can rotate with that. Or you can do I'm not sure if this actually works. Does that give you super speed? It does. Even though that doesn't affect you, it affects enemies. It'll actually yeah, it'll give you super speed too. So you have a lot of like combo fields here that you can do. You got to be careful though, because regenerating mist doesn't work with anything except hammer 3. So you can only do it with that. You can't do it with the Flamethrower 2. But yeah, there's a lot of combo finishers that you have to kind of get used to on Scrapper. And yeah, that'll give you a lot of super speed, and it'll give you a lot of swiftness. And because you've got super speed and swiftness a lot of the time, and stability pulsing from your Flamethrower you know, passive from Juggernaut, you will get object in motion synergy, which is whenever you have any of these 3 boons, super speed, swiftness, and stability, you gain 5% damage per, and that's just more damage modifiers to give your Flamethrower auto attack more damage. So if you look here, I'm just gonna auto attack, and I've got stability, yeah, that's fine, but then I can put down a function gyro and blast it. Now I've got all 3 of those. I've got the super speed, the swiftness, and the stability, and you can see I'm just doing pretty good damage for having no animation, right? That's the thing that makes this build so good, is that, yeah, you see the Flamethrower coming at you, but when do you dodge it, right? Like, do I dodge now? Do I dodge now? Do I dodge? No, you just have to be constantly dodging it, or you have to be doing more pressure than them. So in a way, this build is very uninteractive. But yeah, you know, that's generally the mark of a good build, is it's uninteractive. So yeah. Anyways, so yeah, we have mass momentum. Whenever you have stability, so you're going to have stability a lot of the time because of Juggernaut. You're also going to gain might, so it's like you're gaining double the might from Juggernaut, and that's more synergy for compounding chemicals. And yeah, it's just more of that synergy. Next you have Impact Solvent. We already talked about this a little bit, but basically all the damage that you do is going to come back to you in barrier. And so like in team fights where you're cleaving like a lot of people, this is scaling up a lot. So I'll show you, because like the more people you hit, the more damage you do, the more barrier you get. So yeah, this build really gets most of its sustain in larger scale situations, right? Because what you can do is put down your hammer 5 on the node and then maybe crate it and then just spam, and you can see my barrier is just going up constantly. And barrier lasts like 5 seconds, so it's going down constantly, but you're going to be using that barrier as well because people are going to be throwing out condies and stuff at you. And also, barriers you receive are stronger by 15%, and they reduce the incoming condition damage you have, or you take. So you're going to pretty much constantly have barrier, right, because you're constantly doing damage, hopefully. If you're kiting around, you want to be throwing out as much damage as you can, so oftentimes that means like backpedaling with the flamethrower, because you want to gain the sustain from hitting things, right? Because whenever you hit, you're gaining might and you're gaining right, barrier. But you can also gain sustain, right, just from being in flamethrower, because you're gaining the might and that's giving you compounding chemicals. It's not that much, but it's a little, right? And then backpack regenerator, so you have some passive healing while you're kiting. Yeah, that's an important thing to remember with this build, is you have to recognize when you need to kite, because you want to be really greedy to auto attack with flamethrower, right? Because you're not doing any damage if you're not attacking. It's not like another build where you just throw out your damage and then you kite while you wait for the cooldowns. You can be doing damage constantly with this build. So there are moments where you kind of have to make these decisions, like, do I want to get value and greed, or is it not safe? So you have to, decide between that. And yeah, so there's a lot of like condition damage reduction in this build with Iron Blooded and Adaptive Armor. So even though this build doesn't really have that much Condi Cleanse, you do have a lot of self-sustain against Condis. So let's talk about where the skills go. So I take Healing Turret, obviously. That's just really nice because it gives you more finishers and it cleanses you and your allies. You need the Condi Cleanse. So what you do is you press your heal, you press 2 on Flamethrower, and then you blast the Healing Turret. That gives you 2 heal blasts. So that's really good, because not only does your heal give you, 2 procs of the heal thing. It doesn't show it here, I think. But you also gain the blast from the Flamethrower, which gives you another little chunk of healing for you and your allies. And of course that will be a blast finisher, so you'll get super speed, which is really good. Next you have Purge Gyro. So the reason why I take gyros with this build is because they have no animation, right? So you can be casting your Flamethrower 1 and then use your gyros, and then there's no gap in the damage that you're doing, but you're also gaining sustain. So I just take Purge Gyro to Condi Cleanse and Bulwark Gyro to give you barrier, and right, you got more barrier synergy with Adaptive Armor. And like I said, there's also combo field with this. This is a light field, so if you put down Purge Gyro and then you Flamethrower 2, that's an area Condi Cleanse. And if you put down Bulwark Gyro and you do the 2, that's a lightning field, so that'll give you swiftness if it lasts long enough. Yeah, it didn't last, but you'll get swiftness. And that'll give you more damage because of object in motion, and this will just give you more support because more Condi Cleanse. So yeah. So just being, and it also supports your allies, right? You can do this in it's really good in team fights because you support your allies with that while you're doing damage. And then obviously you have the Flamethrower, which is, your bread and butter. You spam the 1, you press the 2 for combos. The 3 skill is also really good because it does a CC, so like a knockback. So like maybe you're rezzing your allies. What you'll do is you'll put down the function gyro, and then you'll knock back enemies, and then you can res them safely. Napalm is kind of okay. It's just you put that on down bodies and pretty much nothing else. Or if you really want, you can blast it with the Flamethrower 2 for some might, and that'll give you another combo finisher for super speed. And the 5 skill is this is really good because it's a no animation skill, right? Anything with no animation works really well with this build because you can spam Flamethrower during it. But basically, it's a no animation, blind, very close range. And this is really good for stomping enemies. So like you can, I mean, you're pretty much perma stab, right? So you can stomp in Flamethrower anyways. But in the event that there's like, you know, stuff going on or something like that, you can like precast the smoke vent and it just blinds in melee range and do stuff like that. And it's just like, it's self peel without really investing any animations into it. So it's just kind of like free sustain, which is nice. So yeah, those are all the Flamethrower skills. Then you have Crate. I like Crate because it's the lowest investment elite. So if I use Sneak Gyro, yeah, that's kind of nice and that might be useful, but it doesn't really give you that much presence in like 3s, and in team fights you don't really need it that much either, and it doesn't really last that long anyways. So I like to have something that does something, you know, in you know, fights, to do like presence rather than kind of like rotation and like playmaking with Sneak Gyro. So it's going to be one of these 3 utilities, right? But Elite Mortar is kind of like, you have to stick in it for a while to get value from it, right? So, and then you have to leave Flamethrower to do that. So that's not good. Tornado is kind of this, or Elixir X is kind of the same thing. You need to leave Flamethrower to do it, right? So that's why I like Crate. Crate doesn't force you to leave Flamethrower. So it's kind of like the only choice for me, because what Crate does is, you know, you just throw down a bunch of turrets and it's just one animation, and then you can go back to Flamethrower spamming, and it's a 3-second stun, so it makes people stand in your Flamethrower and you can just do damage to them without them being able to kite. And what it does is it puts down a bunch of, you know, turrets that'll immobilize and do damage to people and heal you and your allies. And there's also a smoke field that comes out when you put down your supply crate. So what you can do often is you put down your smoke field from the supply crate, and then you can blast that with your flame blast, and you can make res plays in stealth. Or like if you're getting chased by a lot of people, you can also leap through it, for example, with your hammer 3. So yeah, there's a lot of ways that you can use that for just combos in general on Scrapper are really good. So we're going to talk about the hammer skills now. So hammer auto, you generally don't want to use that because it's worse than Flamethrower. The only things you're using, well, you're going to use all the hammer skills. You like to use, pretty much at the beginning of a fight, you want to be using Thunderclap because it gives out a stun and it's just pulsing damage. Anything that's pulsing is really good for this, right? Because you can use it and then swap into Flamethrower. Like, I can't stress that enough. Like, you're going to be using Flamethrower and everything else is kind of like synergy with it. But yeah, so your 2 skill, that actually does a little bit more damage than Flamethrower. So if you do catch yourself like in hammer and you're in melee range, then yeah, you can use Electro Whirl, but it's mainly used for like reflecting. Like if you'll see maybe clips of me fighting liches, and this will reflect like 1 or 2 of the lich missiles, and then you can use Flamethrower 3 as well, will also reflect projectiles back. So you can use Air Blast, and then you can swap to Electro Whirl, and then, you know, you're going to be counter pressuring liches very well with that. And Rocket Charge is a really nice leap finisher. We already talked about that. You're mainly going to be using that whenever you have Regenerating Mist, because that's kind of the only way you can get it. But it's just a really nice little bit of heal there, because it gives you like a 1000 regen heal, and then you use Rocket Charge through it, so you get a heal finisher. So it's a really nice sustain and evades. So like say you're getting pressured, and like you're going to be flamethrower autoing to counter pressure, right? But maybe you need to really dodge something, so you'll use your F1 and then you'll hammer charge, and that'll be like 3 evades, right? So that's really nice. And then you have a block here as well on hammer, and it gives you barrier when you hit things, so that's really nice. Yeah, you see the barrier there. So yeah, if you're getting like hard pressured, you can swap into hammer, but it's going to reduce your sustain a little bit to not be in flamethrower, right? Because no backpack regenerator, and you're not going to be doing as much damage, right, for the insane barrier that you get from doing flamethrower damage. But yeah, these are kind of necessary to peel for yourself in some situations where you're getting focused. And then we already talked about Thunderclap. You're just going to throw that out. So yeah, that's pretty much all the skills except for the tool belt. We talked about function gyro. You use that and that'll heal or res your allies and stomp enemies depending on, you know, the positioning. So if like one ally is here and one enemy is here, you want to like put it in between, and it'll stomp. It'll put one on that and then one on that, and then it'll res or stomp, you know, respectively. And then yeah, you just want to basically save function gyro if you need to use like stomp or res plays, but otherwise you can just throw it out and then hammer or flamethrower 2 into it for some swiftness and super speed. And then incendiary ammo, you kind of just throw this out whenever it's off cooldown. It just does a little bit of burning, but that's kind of important for your flamethrower auto because it does 10% more damage to burning targets. So even though your flamethrower auto does give a burn at the end of it, it doesn't always land, right? Because it's based on the timing of it. So having incendiary ammo kind of allows your flamethrower to do maximum damage. So if you do want to like save it for a certain situation where you really want to get the maximum damage on your flamethrower, then yeah, save incendiary ammo for that. Otherwise, I just kind of use it off cooldown. But next, we have, so chemical field and defense field are the 2 tool belts of your gyros. Chemical field is actually really good for down bodies. So when there's a down body, what you'll do is you'll put down like a lot of AoE on it. So like you'll try to stomp it, you'll put poison, you'll maybe thunderclap it, maybe do this, and then you'll go back to spamming flamethrower, and then you just have tons of AoE in downstate cleave situations. It's also a poison field, so as I mentioned before, you can flamethrower 2 in that, and that'll give weakness, and it's just a finisher, right? So it'll give super speed. And then defense field is really strong too because it gives you a projectile block. Is it a reflect? Yeah, it's just a block, and it'll also give stability to your allies. So you don't really need that much stability because you've got Juggernaut pulsing it, but there are going to be some situations where you do want more stability, right? Because they're going to be CCing you more often than once per 3 seconds. So yeah, there's a point to having more stability, right? And just giving it to your allies is also really important too, because you want to be supporting your team in team fights. And there's no combo field on this, which is kind of weird because it looks like it should be a combo field, but it's not. And yeah, that's pretty much all of the utilities. So here is your supply crate, what it looks like. And then if you really need, yeah, there's also a healing field at the start. So you want to wait a little bit to get the smoke because the heal is first and then you get stealth there. But I hit something, so you got to be careful you don't hit anything or you'll get revealed. But you can always stealth someone else. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So how this build works, you go into a fight, I already threw my crate down, but you'll throw down your hammer, 5. You'll go in and immediately spam 1 on your flamethrower. And then, depending on what the enemy does, if they're putting Gandhis on you, put down Purge Gyro. And then you can cleanse with Flamethrower 2. And then, you can Bulwark Gyro as well. Give yourself some swiftness and super speed for more damage. The swiftness is really important with this build because you don't really get like movement speed anywhere else, so it is important whenever you're using any of these like finisher or fields that give you you know, swiftness, to actually blast them. Like, I know I said the 1 is really important, but the 2 is also pretty important on Flamethrower. So you want to be casting your 2 on like cooldown pretty much. It's a 6-second cooldown. It does a lot of damage, right? Because you like you shoot it through the target and then it blows up afterwards, and it does a decent amount of damage. So it's not like you're losing too much by not casting Flamethrower 1, because it does damage still, and it gives you the finisher that you need for the synergy with the build. So yeah, you want to be definitely spamming your Flamethrower 2 whenever you have any fields. And then like if you're getting focused, you do the F1 into 3 and you kite away. There's also a little thing with the rocket charge where like the aftercast can be cancelled if you swap into a kit while you're in the rocket charge, and then after the final hit lands, you will stow your kit. So it looks kind of like this. So I go in, last one hits, and then I stow, and then I'm able to, you know, control my character again. There is like a really long aftercast there. So, and then yeah, at that point you're just deciding which skills you need to defend against the enemy. So you're pressing 1 the whole time, but you're also pressing like your utilities and stuff like that all the time to make sure that you're helping your team. You've also got the double blast from the heal turret. So there's a lot of sustain on this build, and a lot of damage. So yeah, it's pretty easy, but there's a little bit more skill to it than just pressing the 1 key, even though that's what it looks like from the surface. But yeah, enjoy.